reaching out for help is really important, and acknowledging that there's a problem is key. I thought that everything had to be okay and fine, and because of that I didn't get the help that I needed. But if we have those tough conversations, that's where we will all find healing.
I'm your host, Jason Hopcus, and today we have Alexandra Lotko. Alexandra was recently crowned Miss Colorado 2024. She is a passionate advocate for mental health and a dedicated educator. Alex is currently pursuing a master's in elementary education at Metropolitan State University of Denver while working as a substitute teacher in Douglas County. Driven by her own experiences with mental health, she champions her community service initiative, It's Okay to Not Be Okay, which aims to destigmatize mental illness and promote seeking help. A former data analyst and recipient of numerous accolades, Alex combines her expertise in education and advocacy to create a positive impact in her community and beyond. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you here today at Nobody's Perfect. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
So, as we jump into this, the question I'm most curious about is what inspired you to pursue this path of becoming Miss Colorado? And congratulations on your achievement of becoming our Miss Colorado for 2024.
Thank you. You know, the points of the crown really just fit in well with my life and some of the things I'm going through right now. I decided about a year ago that I wasn't happy with my career path and that I wanted to go back to school in order to pursue a master's in elementary education, which meant quitting my job and going right back into get a master's degree. That means a lot of extra costs, so scholarship was really important to me. Additionally, I've been involved in community service pretty much my entire life. Unfortunately, with taking night classes, that made the women's group I was in no longer a possibility for the year. So the opportunity to have a platform to promote my own community service initiative was huge for me. Lastly, a lot of my friends moved out of Denver this year. And I think for my mental health, it's really important for me to be surrounded by a community of women. And I knew I needed to do something to find those women that would replace the friends that I didn't have physically here with me anymore. And as an adult, there's not a lot of opportunities to make friends unless you go out of your way to pursue those. And so having the sisterhood aspect of the Miss Colorado opportunity was huge for me.
I love hearing that, and if I'm hearing you correctly, also that you did not grow up a pageant, like that was not your
No.
history. So this was a fairly new thing to you that was really formed out of this desire to seek community, which we are so passionate about here at Nobody's Perfect. But really, in kind of replacing that support system that you had, and then also as a way to fund your education. Did I get that right?
Yeah, exactly. So this was actually my very first pageant I've ever done. I had people tell me growing up to pursue them. My mother actually competed in pageantry, but I never thought that this was something that I could do. You know, I think unfortunately, a lot of times we listen to those stereotypes that pageant women have to be these perfect individuals. And while there are tons of beautiful, high achieving women in pageantry, we all have our own stories and struggles that we've been through. So realizing, hey, those stereotypes aren't always necessarily true. And I actually do fit this ideal of what a Miss Colorado could be really well.
Well, and I love that you're really trying to take the bricks off the wall, so to speak, around this notion of perfection. And pageants are something that I would say, and maybe mistakenly, you can correct me, that is really built on this kind of perfect image of what we should look like and the things that we should be doing. And as somebody who's quite accomplished yourself, and then making a decision kind of midway down the highway and say, hey, I want to do something different, take a different route. I think you're really showing up and shining as an example of a perfection isn't real, and rewriting the story for yourself in a way that feels more aligned and authentic. Certainly in the world that we're living in 2024, I mean, people are struggling at alarming rates.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's honestly a huge misconception. And one thing that our director said throughout competition this year was that it was our job to be flexible and gracious. And so many women that competed this year really embodied that. And knowing that if you can roll with punches and make bad situations into a positive, that really is what pageantry is about. No one expects you to be perfect. They're just looking for someone that can adapt and overcome. And really just make the most of a tough situation. I actually had my evening gown break right before competition, and I was flexible and gracious and just went with it. Life isn't going to be perfect, neither is pageantry. Even if it's perfect looking on the outside, it's never the case.
Well, I love that. And I think being flexible is such an amazing quality to have in life, anyways. And I know you come to this, and what made me so interested in having this conversation with you today is really focused around your community service initiative, which is called It's Okay to Not Be Okay. And you come from that from a deeply personal story. Will you share with us a little bit more about how did that concept evolve and where your passion comes from for supporting this notion that it's okay to not be okay?
Absolutely. So my entire life, I've really struggled with some mental health issues. I have depression. I have an anxiety disorder, and it's been a lifelong struggle. I've been in therapy since high school, and I felt like my entire life I really did things to sweep it under the rug. I'd get to a really low point, and then I'd pull myself together, get into a ton of therapy, try out new medications, and get good enough to keep going with life. But I never really fully resolved the situation. In 2018, I survived a suicide attempt. And unfortunately, that wasn't the end of my journey to healing. I survived, but I didn't get better after 2018. It wasn't like I suddenly was like, okay, this is going to be the lowest low and I'm going to heal now. I went through that whole entire journey again of, okay, let's pull this together and get good enough to keep going. But I didn't actually fully heal. Last year, I decided enough's enough. I was hitting that low point again in life where I didn't want to be here. And I knew I had to take some drastic measures. So I decided to seek inpatient treatment. And it was the best decision I could have ever made. I was terrified to go. I thought that if you went to inpatient treatment, it meant that you were crazy and that it just wasn't something that it was okay to do. It wasn't okay to press pause on life. But any other illness, you'd go and treat it. You wouldn't just scrape yourself together enough to keep going with life. You'd actually go get to the root of the problems and resolve them. And when I was thinking about what I wanted my community service initiative to be, mental health was something that immediately came to mind, but I wasn't sure if I was really comfortable sharing my story. It's not something I have ever talked about a lot, but I realized if somebody had been there to tell me that this treatment option was out there and that I could press pause and I could go seek some drastic measures to get better, maybe I would have found my healing quicker. And so if I can be the voice for someone else so that they get to heal sooner and don't have to go through a 10-year journey of mental health struggles, I think that's my duty.
Well, and kudos to you for taking a deeply painful story and turning that into something that serves others. And I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing. And you're right. I mean, mental health is one of those things that most of us don't talk about, but we certainly don't talk about it often until it hits our own home. And even then, it's not something that we not necessarily want to share with others. So I admire the courage that you've mustered to be able to make this not only kind of the platform to serve others, but really to serve yourself. I guess the question I have, and as a person who struggled with mental health themselves, I can affirm that every time I am open and upfront about my journey and my struggle with somebody, it seems to always open the door for somebody sharing more about their struggle. What experiences have you had since you've been more open about this? Reflect on this
Mm-hmm.
on that for us with a little bit.
Right before competition, I made the decision that I needed to share my story on my own personal social media platforms because I knew I would be asked about it during competition. And I wanted to make sure my friends and family heard it from me prior to me being on a stage and in a spotlight. And it really surprised me to have men and women reach out to me that some of them I was closer to than others, but so many people had struggled with the same things. I had a few girls that I went to high school with reach out to me and say, I'm so proud of you for sharing your story. I'm so sorry you've been through this. I went through this in X year and it was one of the hardest things I've done. And surviving is scary, but it's so important that we share those stories so that everybody else knows that it's a good thing that we're still here and that it got better and that it's my biggest regret that I got to that low point and felt the need to make that choice.
Well, and really, if you peel it all back, it is kind of the foundation and the bedrock of community. I mean, really being
Mhm,
able to show up in our most authentic selves and be seen. And it sounds like through this process, you've allowed yourself to be seen around something that's deeply personal and highly vulnerable. And what was reflected back is not only people that were meeting you at that place, but sharing their own stories of struggles. Because
mhm,
I can imagine a lot of your journey probably looked like putting a game face on and going and doing the thing and nobody really knowing what it was like behind the scenes. Is that pretty
mhm.
accurate?
Absolutely. And, even talking to the women that I competed with, realizing that, a lot of us during competition face similar mental health struggles and had our low days and had days where we cried. I think talking about that after really emphasizes the need that we could have talked about that during. And having that community is really important.
Well, and I'm guessing all of the women that you competed with, I mean, most of you are probably feeling many of the same things. That
Mhm.
if there had been a door to walk through that everybody, okay, we're going to set all of this aside. We're just going to have an honest, real conversation. Can you imagine the connection point that you could have had sooner had that been the case?
Absolutely.
So it's okay to not be okay. I love it. I think it's so spot on
Mhm.
as a name. Tell us a little bit more about the initiative itself. Like
Mhm.
what are your intentions with this service initiative that you've chosen?
Yeah, I really want to let people know that reaching out for help is really important and acknowledging that there's a problem is key. I thought that everything had to be okay and fine. And because of that, I didn't get the help that I needed. But if we have those tough conversations, that's where we will all find healing. So,
I
my biggest goal this year is to just be a public facing figure that shows others that I'm like you. I'm struggling internally. I have good days and I have bad days, but I go to therapy and I make sure I take my medication and I acknowledge and talk to my friends and family when I need extra help.
and what do you say to the person that is thinking you're Miss Colorado? You couldn't possibly know what I'm feeling or what I'm going through.
I tell them that I'm just like you. I haven't done pageantry before. This is my first time competing. I have gone to therapy since I was 13 years old. So just because there's a title doesn't mean that there's any difference between you and I. We're both people at the end of the day. We have to have some humanity in this. And I could put a crown on anyone and it wouldn't change what's going on inside.
Wow, that's powerful to imagine. And yes, you're right. You had mentioned earlier that you've done a career pivot. How much of your personal journey really motivated you to make that and getting more comfortable in your own skin, so to speak, that was cause for you to make this pivot in your career?
It really was key to my mental health journey. My entire life, I embodied perfectionism. I felt like everybody's eyes were on me and that I had to be this perfect individual when that's not the case. We're all living our own lives. And when you sit down and think about it, how often are we really sitting and analyzing other individuals? It's easy to get in your head when it's about you. But if you think logically, when you're freaking out, like, oh, I was embarrassed to get up and blow my nose in class, when have you ever judged someone for blowing their nose in class? So things like that. My career choice was because I thought that's what was expected of me.
Mm.
And I was good at it, but it wasn't making me happy. So when I hit my low point, I was like, okay, I've tried therapy and I've tried medication. That hasn't been enough. I need to be living my life for myself. Do I actually want this career? And I didn't. I was successful and I was good at it, but that wasn't enough for me. I knew one thing that was really important to me growing up was that I felt like I left an impact and was going to have a name after I'm gone from this earth. And for me, I've always been drawn to teaching, but I didn't think it was an option because I didn't think the money could be sustainable for me. But I realized I would rather have to live more frugally and be happy at the end of the day. So, children bring me joy. I love working with kids, and I decided I don't need a fancy corporate title to have people be impressed by me. Teaching is just as an impressive career choice, and happiness, I think, in this day and age, is even more impressive than any career choice you could make. So, you have to do what brings you joy and do what makes you happy. And that led to my career change.
Absolutely, and again, I mean, you were the perfect pick for Miss Colorado 2024. I mean, really, literally embodying these principles and living them. You're not only showing up and giving us some words, you're actually living these. And, to be your age and to understand that you're pursuing a path that's ultimately not going to fill your cup, and you move into something doing something very admirable and different, albeit probably paced differently, is really, it's a bold step. And I
Thank
love
you.
seeing your heart for service in doing this work and showing up for kids today. How has it's okay to not be okay, and the personal work that you've done, how is that showing up for you as in your role as a substitute teacher these days?
hmm I really made it a point to make sure I take trainings that equip me to work with children that are going through things. Because at the end of the day, we are all dealing with something internally. So taken trauma informed practices training. And as a substitute, you're only there for a blip in most students' lives, but you can still make a difference. I make sure to take note of the kids that are struggling day to day and to leave that note behind and pick up on those issues that might be going on. Maybe they're not, but if I don't say something and I miss something and a kid could have been helped, I'm not okay with that. And then things like some students struggle with anxiety. I know I did. And so I don't like to do things like popcorn reading. I know that's an added stressor, and our kids have enough on their plates already. And if I can at least alleviate a little bit of that, I like to.
Well, and thank you for doing so. I think it's so important, and really goes back to what we talked about earlier, is seeing the person in front of you, seeing the people in front of you, and then that being reflected back and being seen. So tell us a little bit more about It's Okay to Not Be Okay, kind of coming into the funnel. What does that initiative practically look
Mhm,
like? I know there's a lot of
mhm.
conversation around it. There's this vulnerable transparency that you're really showing up with. What do you imagine that looks like as you walk through the year as Miss Colorado? How are you spreading that impact with your message?
Yeah, it's this year it's my goal to get into a school in every school district, which is a lofty goal. But I think being able to talk about mental health with all age groups is very important to me. Additionally, I have some mental health awareness walks on my calendar that are coming up, and ultimately sharing my vulnerabilities on social media is going to be very important to me. I think, especially with our youth, social media is so important. So if I can display that in a platform that they're comfortable with and already interact with, I think that'll be very important.
As I was researching for this, I know kind of a cornerstone of what you're doing is creating a safe space for these conversations. Help us understand,
hmm
what does that look like? What is a safe space for these
hmm
conversations look like, aside from you getting the training to be culturally competent and having these
hmm
conversations in a trauma informed way? How can somebody listening just show up in a different way if they want to?
Yeah, the key really is to listen and to not put words in one another's mouths, and to make sure that we're giving that space to fully hear what someone's going through. A lot of times when we hear someone's story, we jump to say, "Oh, I feel so bad for you. How can I fix it?" But we are responsible in our own to get the help and to get the tools we need to fix things. So hearing, how can I help you? Instead of, here, let me do this, that, and the other thing to fix the situation, is a much better tool, in my opinion. I really make sure to just believe people at the heart of what's going on. It's really hard to share what's mental health struggles we're going through. And if you can just be a voice to let someone cry and make them comfortable and know that it's okay to cry. I am definitely a crier, and I think any of the women that I've competed with could tell you that. Passing someone a tissue can be the difference between them feeling comfortable, as instead of turning around and looking away and making them feel like it's something to be embarrassed of.
You're so correct with that. And I think one of the important things to recognize is, so many of us get in these conversations that maybe we don't have the skills or the training or the aptitude to be in
Mhm,
that place with somebody. I think it's really important to recognize and honor that you don't have a responsibility to fix it. Sometimes somebody just needs
mhm,
you to be there physically, to sit with them, to be kind and say, it's okay to say, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to help you,
mhm,
but I'm here to listen, and will do whatever it is that I can. Like, I
mhm.
think it's important to normalize that.
Absolutely. We can figure it out together. There are resources out there, and even if you're not the expert on it, that's okay. There's therapy resources, and there's all sorts of websites and hotlines and various different things that we can utilize to make sure if I can't help you, someone out there can.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I know it's not been that many years since you were in high school.
Mhm.
Do you observe that things are different or have they changed? Do you think mental health is more of a crisis today than it was when you were in school?
Especially since COVID, I really do think it's increased drastically. I think luckily we do have social media to form connections and community, but it's also hurt our connections and community. It's been very easy for us to not interact with one another in person. I think most of us can admit that if we have the option to text or email, we're really unlikely to give a phone call or to go and meet with someone in person. And those connections are important too. It was great during the pandemic that we at least had the option to stay connected through technology, but that in-person interaction is very important too. Unfortunately, I also think bullying is at an all-time high with our social media, and people like to hide behind anonymous tools, and that can really be detrimental to people's mental health. I think we don't have enough resources out there, unfortunately, and there's not enough access and there's not enough awareness of what is available out there for us.
Yeah, I agree with you, which is the foundation of the work we're doing here at Nobody's Perfect Community was really built upon getting there are some good resources available, but getting connected to them in a straightforward way, which I believe we've done beautifully for youth
Mhm.
teams, families, parents, caregivers, providers, etc. With our Nobody's Perfect community platform is really important, and recognizing that, when somebody is struggling, helping us create the shortest line between I am struggling to I got support, I think is really
Mhm.
important and necessary. And frankly, in 2024, it just shouldn't be that hard.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned a minute ago something that I talk about a lot, kind of this there is no replacement for connection outside of, kind of this
Mhm.
one or face-to-face connection. If you're a teen that's struggling and perhaps you're um you are one that kind of buries yourself in your phone or technology and devices, what do you
Mhm.
think is a first step to kind of pull somebody out of that to make some connections that can really make a difference in supporting them just in life or with their mental health specifically?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm actually a fairly shy individual, so that's something that I've always struggled with. But something that's always helped me are compliments. I think there's not a person out there that doesn't like to get a compliment. And 99% of the time, you can look around you and any person, you can find at least something about them that's worthy of a compliment. And something that small can start a conversation that can start a friendship. So if you're trying to make a friend, start with a compliment. It'll get your foot in the door at the very least, and maybe it doesn't start a full-blown conversation that day. The next day you can try another one, and you can keep on trying, and eventually I'm sure it'll form at least one friendship.
I love that. And that really is rooted in just seeing somebody and being authentic about what you see uh,
Mhm.
and sharing that. I think that's a really beautiful suggestion. What do you think is missing in the conversation when we talk about youth and mental health today?
I really think it goes back to expecting us to keep going and moving forward immediately and trying to fix the problem as quickly as possible instead of trying to fix the problems and issues in our lives correctly. Sometimes that'll be an expeditious process that we can do quickly and get it done. But sometimes it's going to take a little bit more work. For me, that involved family therapy, it involved individual therapy, it involved group therapy, it involved working through some trauma. And it was a long process, but it was worth it.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and recognizing that there is an element of finding your team. I mean, you're not in this
Mhm.
journey alone. And I think what so many of us, as we start struggling, we feel like we're the only person that's faced this, that nobody else is going to understand. And as we've talked about in this episode, I mean, there are people that will show up and meet you that are further along the journey or just will walk beside
Mhm.
you where you're at. It sounds
Mhm.
like you had a pretty supportive family in this journey. For the person who necessarily doesn't, what do you think is
Mhm.
a direction for them to really to still show up and recognize that they're not alone?
My family has been very supportive, but sometimes there were tough conversations that had to be had. And focusing on yourself and saying that I need this for me to be okay really helped me. My family was not immediately on board with all of the treatment that I needed, and getting their support was a bit of a journey. I think focusing on yourself and finding the online resources out there that acknowledge that, hey, people have done this work and it has worked for them, talking to your friends, talking to your school counselors, and realizing that even if my family doesn't support and believe in this, there's proof out there that it does work.
I agree with that. And again, I think it's important to recognize that just because you're struggling and have recognized it in yourself doesn't mean that everybody else in your team, your network, your family system, whatever it may be, not everybody gets to the same conclusion or the same place at the same
Hmm.
time. And I think really understanding that and
Absolutely.
recognizing that there are likely some hard conversations to be had, that it sounds like for you really started with just kind of standing your ground, being vulnerable and saying, this is the help that I
Hmm.
think I need, and really being steadfast in getting that support.
Hmm. Definitely.
So tell us what's next for It's Okay to Not Be Okay. I know
Hmm.
you're just kind of hitting the ground running with Miss Colorado for this year.
Hmm.
You're doing some substitute teaching.
Hmm.
What is this going to look like this year?
Yeah, so we have some school visits coming up this year, as well as some mental health awareness walks. I'm starting a mental health initiative for Mental Health Mondays to share a little bit of the tips and tricks that help me keep going day to day. And ultimately, I would love to start a blog, and I'm exploring creating my own children's book as well.
I love that. Well, there's no shortage of passion in the work that you're doing. So if anybody's listening, I know you mentioned Mental Health Mondays. If there's anybody
Mhm.
that wants to hook onto your star, how can they do that? How can they get connected with you, Alex?
They can reach out to me on social media. So they're welcome to take a look at the Miss Colorado Instagram. There's also the Miss Colorado Opportunity Instagram and my personal Instagram, Alex Lotko.
I love that. And as we're wrapping up here, Alex, is there any advice that you would give a youth that's struggling with their mental health if they're in that state where they don't really know what to do next? Like, what
Mhm.
would you suggest that maybe what's one thing that they could take a next step on?
My main suggestion is that it gets better, and that the first thing you can do is contact an adult and say that you're struggling, talk to a mandatory reporter, talk to one of your teachers and say that you need help. Your school has resources for you, including guidance counselors. If you're comfortable talking to mom or dad, great. But if you're not, go to your school.
I love that really practical approach. And one question we always like to ask our guests when we interview them is, what does nobody's perfect mean to you?
Nobody's perfect to me really just means that we all go through struggles, and that no matter how great we present ourselves, that doesn't mean everything's fine and dandy on the inside. But I think it also means that we're all perfect in our own way. The imperfections are what make us all unique and great, and we wouldn't be human without them.
I love that. Alex, I want to thank you for your time today. I'm so grateful to have you here and using your platform as Miss Colorado 2024 and your community service initiative. It's okay to not be okay. Thank you for being you, and thank you for doing this work to show up in service of others. It means a
Thank
lot.
you. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the work that you do. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for being part of the Nobody's Perfect community dedicated to supporting, inspiring, and empowering youth and families. We hope you enjoyed today's transformative conversation. Together, we are dismantling stigma and providing solutions for mental health and well being challenges so everyone can thrive. Join us every other week for a new episode on Nobody's Perfect community or on your favorite streaming platform to continue embracing our shared human experience. If you or someone you know is struggling, visit Nobody's Perfect community to get immediately connected to a hub of clinically approved mental health resources and tools designed to support you wherever you find yourself on your journey. And be sure to follow at Nobody's Perfect Community on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I'm your host, Jason Hopcus, and it's been a pleasure having you here today. Stay connected, stay inspired, and remember, nobody's perfect because perfection isn't real. Your story is. Until next time.